This episode is brought to you by Audi. The road is calling. Embrace the thrill of the drive with the all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron. Featuring effortless power, serious acceleration, and advanced Audi tech. It's not just a new EV, it's a new way to experience driving. The all-new, fully electric Audi Q6 e-tron is here. The next chapter of Audi starts now.
I can completely understand how hard it would be to go through the whole broadcast landscape and find out if, in this market, this giant conglomerate is doing great news work, but in this market, they're not. I can completely understand why that would be just awful to dig through. But yeah, there's gaps, and there are people that are filling in those gaps.
This is Small Press Big Ideas, a podcast about the business of local news in the United States. I'm your host, Paul Gewertz. Small Press Big Ideas is about the opportunities and challenges that local news publishers are facing for their businesses. I'll sit down and talk with journalists, entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders, and more in the local news industry to find out what's working, what isn't, and how the local news ecosystem can innovate and flourish in the 21st century. All right, today on the podcast, I'm joined by Ron Fields. Ron is the Director of Publisher Partnerships for EmpowerLocal, where they connect leading advertisers with local community media anywhere in the U.S. And Ron, we've spoken several times, and I think we messaged back and forth quite a bit now, but it's the first time doing it on mic, so thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Hey, Paul, just a heads up, this is my first podcast, so...
First podcast, sweet.
First podcast ever.
So like I said, you and I, we have a bit of rapport. We've talked several times. Now I like learning stuff from you every time I talk to you, like I said before. But if you could just give the listeners a brief bio of your life and your career in local news and where you're at now, I'd love to hear it.
Oddly enough, I'm a political science criminal justice major and never took one journalism class. So it's like that Ferris Bueller meme. Never took one lesson.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, I was completely going to law school or something like that. But then I worked for a lawyer, and I did not want to do divorces and DUIs the rest of my life. So yeah, I got out of college and I started stringing football games for a little local paper in a town of about 10,000 people. And the next thing I knew, I was the City Hall reporter, and I had just kind of stumbled back asswards into a career. I was thinking about this earlier because you asked me about my background, but my first boss was American Newspaper Holdings.
Okay.
Based in Canada. They actually ended up being transformed into Liberty, which transformed into Gatehouse, which transformed now into Gannett. So they were actually my first employer in the business, but it was a good experience. I had good editors, and had a chance to run my own paper when I was 24.
Wow.
And
where was that at?
It was dead smack in the middle of Illinois, where I'm from. But yeah, 24 is too young to be an editor. Which you learn pretty quickly. But so yeah, I worked my way back and kind of up into a nice family-owned chain that was in Iowa, mostly Kansas, but I worked for the Iowa paper for a long time. And working for that family-owned chain was just a gift. But as every newspaper person will tell you, burnout shows up about every 7 to 8 years, and burnout showed up. So after sitting in pretty much every seat possible on the editorial and management side, I jumped over to broadcast, and I worked for a radio company for about 10 years, helping them start up a news product, again in the Midwest. But yeah, that's kind of the long story short of me. I've spent my whole life on the editorial side of the world, and it's been not always the funnest time, but definitely the most interesting job that anybody's ever had.
That's great.
I get a lot of that sentiment. Like maybe it's not the funnest, but it's like, I don't know, interesting, rewarding, whatever you want to call it. People say that a lot. So what do you do? I don't know if I've ever actually asked you when we spoke before. What exactly is your day to day at Empower now? Like, I know you're on a lot of calls with publishers, which is why I love, initially want to talk to you on the podcast. But just what's your day to day doing there?
Yeah, I actually worked with Empower as a publisher for a couple years. I stumbled across them during shutdown and the pandemic, and when the opportunity arose, well, actually, I won't lie, the grim media reaper finally caught me. After years, I was lucky enough to have a really good relationship with these guys, and what we do, really, my day to day is talking to publishers across the country. Sometimes 7 or 8 a day, and learning about them, talking about their publication, figuring out their pride points and their pain points, and trying to help them, sustain themselves. And I think we're doing a really, really good job at that. We're right at 625-ish publishers that we're working with. My point of pride is, again, that old editorial guy, 6 Pulitzer Prize winners.
Awesome.
That makes me feel good. And to help out somebody that's got a Pulitzer sitting on the shelf and we're able to help them is just something that makes you, it makes you go to sleep better.
That's pretty cool, man. And you said you guys have been blowing up last time I talked to you lately, right? Just in terms of the business. I don't know why or anything. I don't know if we talked about that, but it sounded like you're growing pretty strongly right now.
It's been a really kind of an uptick. You see a start, and I think we're still considered a startup. We're about 6 years old, but you kind of see that growth metric, and then there's the hockey stick, and we're kind of right in the hockey stick right now.
Awesome. Good place to be. Okay, so kind of one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on is you and I have spoken before about news deserts, and I think you even says in your profile something about it, fighting the good fight against news deserts. So you're well aware of the problem, and I've had other folks on to talk about it on here and everything. It's not like the full scope of this show, but it's it's interesting and it's an issue. And you had mentioned to me that you think sometimes maybe the data may be a little bit of a misinterpretation. Could you maybe explain to the audience and to myself again, just kind of what you mean by that when it comes to interpreting what a news desert is and how it's kind of gauged?
Yeah, I mean, I've been watching these studies come out for a decade now, and it's always very informative. It's always very alarming. But I think what's missing is a lot of digital onlys, which actually got added to the report this year, but also broadcast and all weeklies, business journals, not traditional newspapers, where the studies generally seem to be focused on traditional newspapers or PBS. I believe they added PBS this year. There are radio stations, radio companies, TV stations that are doing tremendous local work, and they're simply not counted. And then the other kind of, if you want to dig into weeds a little bit on these studies, they go county by county. There are many publications that have become the news source for 5, 6, 10 counties. So even though there's maybe not a newspaper, like a proper newspaper or a PBS station, they still have significant news coverage. And I think there's just a nuance there that's missing.
That's interesting. I just had a guy on the podcast, and I don't know if his episode will have aired or not by the time yours comes out. His name is Max Cabot, and he is in Texas. I can't think of the name of the town right now. Borderlands, way southwest Texas. And him and his wife took over a publication down there. And I think the county is the size of Maryland that he's in.
Right.
And they're like the only publication there. But I mean, they're doing great work. But, I bet maybe even neighboring counties may be counted in. It's a very sparsely populated kind of like poverty-stricken area, I think. Maybe not poverty-stricken. That might be a little strong. But, underserved area. Just the first thing that pops to mind of people I've been talking to lately, where I bet he's doing great work, has an awesome print product. The community loves it. But some people around him may be considered like a news desert,
Yeah, I'll give you a for instance. I'm in a town of 22,000 in western Kansas. We spun up a news site after an unfortunate hedge fund purchase of the local newspaper here, and it was with a broadcast company. By the time I left, we were doing 2.5 to 3 million page views a month and covering probably 20 counties in northwest Kansas. Obviously not covering every school board meeting,
Right.
every council meeting, but if something significant popped up 45 miles away, we were there, and we were the only people there. But we're broadcast, so we don't count.
You talk to a lot of publishers, 7 or 8 a day sometimes, you said. My introvert brain that makes me want to take a nap when I think about that many calls a day. I do maybe a couple, but it's a lot of people to be talking to, but it's very cool too. Can you think of like a couple of examples to tell people of people doing cool stuff that you may not hear about in news deserts? You kind of mentioned the one you did. I'm just curious if anything else comes to mind around the country, interesting case studies, like independently that you can think of.
I've got a ton of them. The first one that comes to mind is somebody that I kind of found on my own called Big Country News Connection in Lewiston, Idaho. It's actually a radio company.
Right. I think we spoke about this.
But they're doing fantastic work and generating a ton of traffic. They're free. First of all, they're free, which again, we've talked about barbed wire fences. That's a barbed wire fence with the paywalls. There's Chicago suburbs. There's a website called Evanston Now that just does fantastic journalism. In Wisconsin, I've got one of my favorite publishers is Judy at the Washington County Insider. Again, all of these are digital only. There's no print product associated with them. Decorah News, Decorah, Iowa, which is a beautiful town, but not a big town, has a print newspaper, and the Decorah News, which is a digital-only product, free to the public. They do terrific work. And then, I'll just throw this one out there. Midwest Family Radio is really figuring out how to turn the radio audience into that digital news audience by spinning up sites that aren't named after their radio station. They don't call it Talk of the Morning 10:45 a.m.com. They call it Rock River Current.
Okay.
And they're driving great traffic, but they're also doing, yeoman's work on providing the news, information. People need to know when streets are closed, when school's out, when all this stuff's going on. They need to know when to vote. I mean, it's election day today. They need to know when and where to vote. And, all these companies, every single one of these I mentioned are probably not included in that news desert study.
That's crazy. And so once again, I'm not sure when this is airing. I'll probably push it up because it's it coincides with the Medill study that just came out for the year. Is that who does it? How do you say it? Medill?
Metal.
Northwestern. Yeah. The news desert study. So I wanted to bring that up a bit because it came out just a week or two ago from when we're talking right now. And you pointed out, I think just on LinkedIn, like, look, I think you pointed out to your local radio station. Is that what it was? It gets, I don't know how many monthly viewers and isn't counted in there. Right. So, I mean, it's great what they're doing with Medill. It's good work, but I almost wonder if it's like overly alarmist or something like that. You know what I mean? Or it's just not getting a full picture of.
I think that's it. It's not a full picture. There's just there's gaps where I can completely understand how hard it would be to go through the whole broadcast landscape and find out if, in this market, this giant conglomerate is doing great news work, but in this market, they're not.
Right.
I can completely understand why that would be just awful to dig through. But yeah, there's gaps, and there are people that are filling in those gaps. I mean, even to the point where you've got these little, and you're probably familiar with these little, hey, you're from Montrose, those sorts of things that just provide little interesting tidbits about your community. It's almost a news site. It's not a news site. I'm not going to say it is, but it's interesting and provides you some context on where you're living, what your life is, which is, that's what newspapers have done for hundreds of years.
Local news needs new revenue streams, and my company, localpod.co, makes it easy and affordable. Our entry-level offering transforms your written content into high-quality audio and monetizes it with programmatic ads, all with zero extra work on your end. Think of it as a plug-and-play podcast solution for publishers. And if and when you're ready, we'll help you stair-step your podcast feed up to even more content, whether that's in-depth investigative reporting, interviews with community leaders, or whatever ideas you may have. You keep reporting, we help you turn it into new revenue. So you can get started at localpod.co, link in the show notes, or click the link in the show notes to set up a call with us today and learn more. Okay, back to the episode. Yeah, and it's funny, you kind of called my attention to this thing, and then, I don't know what that phenomenon is called, where you hear about something and then you hear it everywhere. As soon as, like I said, I think I messaged you, I'm like, once you see this, you can't unsee it. And then, because Mike Shapiro has been on the show several times, he put up a story on LinkedIn shortly after, also kind of calling out the same thing. So you kind of spoke on how difficult it would be. So let's set that aside, how difficult it could be. Do you have any thoughts on, say that they had unlimited budget and human power to go out and dig into and actually get to the bottom of the problem? Okay, just in a hypothetical. How would you measure local news coverage? Because there's like you said, it's almost a news site. It's not a news site. There's some stuff, if you went all the way down the line, you could call social media, Nextdoor or something, local news. But that's not accurate at all. There's no journalistic rigor there, and I may be getting in the weeds here. But in your opinion, say there's unlimited budget and human power, how could you find out, the actual state of the news deserts and dig into that? What metrics would you go on?
So I spend probably at least a half hour before I talk to any publisher and research their site, their market, get a good feel for their traffic. If they've got a media kit, that's always handy. But really kind of comparing that traffic to the population that they're serving is kind of the ratio that I look for. They're in a town. I've got a really cool publisher named Isaiah in Houston. He's in Houston, Missouri, but it's also Houston, Missouri is in Texas County, which is super confusing.
It's really confusing, yeah.
But Isaiah...
Houston, Texas, Missouri. Okay.
Exactly. Isaiah runs the Houston Herald. He lives in a town of, I think, 2,200 people and has a tremendous print product, but also a very robust digital product. So his overall traffic isn't mind blowing, but compared to the size of the community he's serving, he's doing gangbusters. So, it's really that ratio. If you're talking to somebody in Houston, Texas, and they're doing what Isaiah is doing in Houston, Missouri, you're not that impressed.
Right.
I'm impressed by Isaiah, though.
Just by that ratio there, right. Do you have any idea of what that looks like population to, I don't know what metric you'd use, page views, impressions? Or is it just kind of you can just kind of get a gut feel by looking at it like that?
I think a lot of it's gut feel. And
okay.
A lot of it is, again, a lot of it's gut feel. When you're look, and again, I'm bringing this up again, but when you come up on the editorial side of the world, you get a good feel for something that smells fishy or smells awesome.
Right.
And when you catch somebody and they're like, man, this little publication is rock star.
That's
it's
awesome.
Really fun to talk to them. And yeah, that's it does become a gut situation, but that's why whenever I talk to these publishers, we spend the first 10, maybe 15 minutes simply talking about their publication. I want to know as much as I can about them and their story. We're all in the same boat, but everybody's got a slightly different seat in the boat and a slightly different story. And it's just super interesting. I've got the best job in the world.
It sounds really fun. I love just talking to people that's on the podcast. So I'm like, man, you're just getting like inbound people to talk to and dig into this stuff is very interesting. And it's all like on a case by case basis too. And I'm sure you meet some characters and some funny. You've brought up a few people just in our previous calls that I need to connect with that sound really cool too. And yeah, like I said, the different seats in the boat. It's like what's the old thing? The blind men explaining what an elephant is. You know, like they're all touching different parts of the elephant. They're like, no, it feels like this trunk, and it's like I can't forget how the allegory or whatever it is goes, but something along those lines. And I also want to touch on how you said kind of that ratio, like you said it's a gut thing. You could tell just how well they're engaged with the community and everything. So I come from a podcasting background, and you know I've been starting to work with more local publishers. It's kind of why I started this podcast. But I've worked with like business people and stuff before, launching their podcast before, and influencers, brands, a variety of different types. And one thing in the podcasting space, which kind of echoes this, is just what you reminded me of is I've had podcasts from influencers, for lack of a better term, with 1 million person followings, okay? And they will get thousands of downloads out of the get-go. And it's just nothing. No brands want to touch them or anything like that. And it's just like, oh yeah, it's a good show. And then I've had like, business people, service providers who provide super high quality content to like their person they work with. They get 100 downloads a month, maybe. And they are just crushing it in their business with the podcast, with everything. So that's kind of what it reminded me of when you brought that up. Just a different front. That's my filter on it from the podcast world.
Yeah, the podcast, we started getting into podcasts toward the end of my broadcast career, and it was interesting watching like these legacy radio dudes who were just so used to being on the air, live, off the cuff.
Yeah, I don't know how they do it. I've listened to them before. I'm like, I don't know how they can go for hours every day, but yeah.
And they're so, oh my gosh, they're so talented. They got such great voices. But watching them move to the digital world where they all of a sudden got to edit their own stuff.
Yeah, right.
Listen to themselves. It was like, guys, you do this every day for 2, 3, 4 hours in the morning and you never edit your stuff. Why are you doing it now?
That's a good point. Anybody out there listening from radio, keep that in mind. Have you ever listened? Sorry, I'm going on more of a tangent here. I don't know if you're a podcast listener. Have you ever heard of the podcast Hardcore History?
I'm sorry, Paul. I'll apologize.
I'm not a podcast guy. That's fine. A lot of people aren't. Anyway, if you ever are looking for one, there's this guy named Dan Carlin who does this show. Podcast listener. It's a very famous show. It's called Hardcore History. And he does deep dives. They're like 4, 5, 6 hours long about it'll be about just the Mongol Empire or something and like the Khans, or just this the lead up and then the first half of World War I or something. But he comes from a talk radio place before. This is much more research, but that's he's great. It's quite a talent being able to go for that long and keep people like hooked into it.
4, 5, 6 hours is a lot.
Well, it's edited, so I don't think he does it in a sit because he's referencing like 8 or 10 different books that he read or something like that. It's quite a production. Anyway, I'm getting way out in the weeds here. I'll reel it back in a little bit here. So I asked you a better way of measuring local news coverage. So say that some Medill, Northwestern, whoever, with the unlimited budget and the unlimited like human resources to go and actually study this thing, what would you, and I didn't have this in my lead up notes or anything, but I'm just curious now, what mediums would you even look at? Are there any strange ones? And what I mean is, digital only broadcasts you talked about. Would you include like newsletters in there? Would you include any kind of social media stuff like that? Like, where do you draw the line in your opinion? It doesn't have to be like
social media. No, I know there's some folks that do really locally focused, pages or groups on on Facebook, but it's not news. It's just not. It's not the level of quality, ethics, um, you know, attention to detail, all the things that make all the people that hopefully are listening to this special in the world. It's not an easy job. It's not something you just spin up out of nowhere. You've got to have a passion for it. You've got to have the knowledge for it. And you got to pay attention to it. But newsletters are interesting. I see a lot of people doing good stuff with newsletters. I'm guessing there's probably just from local news sites, like small local news sites, there's probably a million newsletters that go out every morning. Speaking about newsletters, 2025 is going to be an exciting year for EmpowerLocal. We're going to be we're right on the cusp of rolling out a solution for publishers and brands across the country to connect via newsletters, and that's going to expand even to other channels, including sponsored content, native content, and even podcasts. So we're really looking forward to connecting, more people with more brands across the country, and hoping to benefit our publisher network that way.
So yeah, that's definitely been a trend, the newsletter thing. So you're thinking newsletters, digital, broadcast, primarily, kind of the classic channels.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on social. I've had some awesome people on here doing really cool stuff on social media, and it's nothing against them or anything. It's more like I don't trust the platforms. You know what I mean? The metas and the Twitters or X, whatever, of the world and everything. And one good example of this, just, you can get as conspiratorial about them or whatever, but like a very practical thing is we were trying to find out, my wife and I, when something was happening, this kind of fall festival recently. We couldn't find any info anywhere. And then finally, there it is. It pops up on Facebook, like 5 days after the event. And I'm like, oh, awesome. Thank you for feeding me that now. I guess we will not be attending. So that's kind of my take on it. It can be useful for, I like people using social media, like local publishers, to gain attention and then feed them back into an email list or their site or whatever, some way to kind of get them off of there. That's kind of the challenge. And the other struggle there is the social media companies don't want you to leave there.
Yeah, one of the things that we did in my last company was we would actually run an article through our local news feed every couple of weeks. But it was basically, you're not going to see the news if you're just looking at Facebook. So make sure you bookmark whatever.com, check that out, and make sure you bookmark it on your phone too, so you could look at work.
Right.
But yeah, we actively promoted becoming a community portal and a homepage, and I think a lot of people miss that too. I think they're a little hesitant to throw anything out there against Facebook,
right?
Meta, X, whatever platform it is. But I mean, if we're talking about legacy newspapers, the legacy newspaper was in the rack on Sundays.
Right.
That's where you went for it. Now the legacy newspaper can simply be in the rack that's a bookmark on your phone.
Yep. I think there's something could be done with social, maybe just not the existing platforms. I had a lady on named Coralie St. Louis, and she's launching an app called Impact Social, and it's like a social media app. So she was just launching it. I need to get back in touch with her because this was a while back. And for now, it's basically it pulls an RSS feed from like your local news sites, like verified local news, to where you are. But going forward, it's going to be this kind of cool thing where it kind of functions like a Reddit or something, like social media, but only verified journalists can post. Other people can like comment on that and everything. The only problem there is like finding the scale. You need to make it work in a large area before it works viably as a business. You know what I mean? But like ideas like that are super cool, I think, around social media, if she could pull it together and like make that work. But yeah, that's my thoughts there.
I am super excited about, I talked to a really good cat at Village Media up in Canada,
Yeah, we spoke about this, I believe. Yeah.
And you know what Facebook did to news in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
They basically sparked up their own Facebook competitor called Spaces.ca. So if you lie, you can sign up for the waiting list and just say you live in Toronto. Just lie. But they're getting ready to fire this up in a couple weeks, and I'm super curious to see what it does, especially in a place where Facebook no longer delivers one single news story to a news feed a day.
Yeah, that was really kind of crazy when that happened. If you ask, and apparently it kind of snuck in. Like a lot of Canadians were not like, wait a minute, what? You know what I mean? That's from what I've heard in my places I listen to and everything like that. So, awesome, man. Okay, I think we've touched on all the points I wanted. Actually, I did want to ask you one more thing while I've got you here. So you talked about how many you have all these, you look at a local publisher site for 20, 30 minutes and their market and everything, and then talk to them. And I want to dig in a little more about what do you connect people with, like through Empower? Like, how do you actually help people out? How's that work? I would just like to understand that a little more clearly, because I don't know if we've ever actually spoken about it.
Yeah, really kind of high level. Our business model is all based around reconnecting national brands to hyper local, hyper loyal audiences across the country. A Verizon, a PetSmart, a Dignity Memorial, those are all active campaigns we've got running right now. They all want to be in that audience. They all want to touch, your local communities. They can't do it. There's no way to fill out 1,000 different insertion orders with 1,000 different contacts and creative sizes and rates. So we're that conduit to bring those high quality folks back into local news publications.
Okay.
And not just jam it full of, junk remnant ads.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Yeah, it seems like really valuable to all parties, but like you said, that's it's not like a click a button and connect everybody. You know what I mean? You kind of need to know. That clarifies a little more for me. Because that's kind of an idea I had of what I thought you did, but that's super interesting. Because I was just digging around on Empower a little bit before we hopped on, and kind of trying to refresh myself on what it is and everything like that.
I don't know if I told you about this one, but we just launched a campaign just targeting Arizona. Did I tell you about this one?
No, I don't think so. It doesn't ring a bell.
This campaign is just targeting Arizona. It's with Dr. Bombay's ice cream, which is a low lactose ice cream, but it's co-owned by Snoop Dogg.
Okay, maybe you did tell me about this. I'm remembering once you brought up the Snoop Dogg part of it. Yeah, okay. Continue though. Yeah.
Snoop Dogg's Gin and Juice is actually sponsoring the Arizona Bowl at the end of December. But we're running this campaign for the Dr. Bombay side of his business that allows kids a chance to win a VIP trip to the game with Snoop Dogg. It just launched. It's so exciting. And the creatives are really cool. Like Snoop Dogg's actually in the ads. It's crazy.
That's really cool.
My 17-year-old daughter just keeps asking me, when am I going to meet him?
Okay, Ron, I think we've touched on everything. Is there anything else you wanted to bring up for the podcast or anything like that? And, there's always an open invitation if you ever want to come back on, or, we could keep our continuing calls going, I hope, as well. But anything else I missed or anything else you want to point people to or anything?
Yeah, if anybody wants to, just kind of BS and talk shop with me, I'm always willing to see if we're, good fit. If we're not, that's fine too. I'm still going to like talking to you. But just go to EmpowerLocal.com. Up in the upper right, there's a book a demo, and that's my personal calendar link.
Excellent. I'll link to that. I'll link to your LinkedIn page too, because I think you're pretty active on there. We message back and forth quite a bit. I think that's how we first got in touch. So I'll do that also.
Well, your job now is making me sound good.
I can do that. It's what I do most of my day, actually. So I like these calls. I get to not be in my audio editing software. All right. Thanks, Ron. I appreciate it, man.
Yep. Good to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Small Press Big Ideas. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to help the show, the best thing you can do is to tell a friend or colleague and just take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to right now. It only takes a minute out of your day, but it really does help the podcast grow and reach more ears. Check back for new episodes every Monday.